welcome everybody. Thank you very much for coming and joining us today to talk about social impact bonds. It does feel, I have to say, quite strange because this is so much something still in its infancy. And there's so much still to learn that it feels almost strange managing to put together a program of a day of learning and mutual learning so early in the development of this type of project and this type of marketplace. So thank you all very much for being here. I would say that we're here really for three reasons. The first is to share what little or what we've learned thus far in trying to put this together. And the second is very much to learn from everybody here. We've intentionally tried to bring together a healthy mix of service providers, commissioners, and investors so that people can learn from each other and we can learn from you. And the third reason is to start building the network and the marketplace of organizations and individuals interested in this kind of work so that people can start interacting with each other and learning and developing these projects independently. And we've been trying to develop the tools and systems and practices for people to do so. So what are we talking about? Very simply, the social impact bond is a contract. And it's a contract with government where we agree a value of a certain social outcome for a certain target population. And we know that that outcome is going to take a while to measure. Reduced recidivism in our first one in Peterborough, for example, the cohort might take nearly 2 years to come out of prison. They need to reoffend for a year before they can be measured. They need to go through the courts for 6 months after that. Then some measurement time needs to take place before we can actually collect all the data, so that's another 3 months. So it's nearly 4 years before you can measure the first positive social outcome or not. So we take that contract and we put it into a fund, and we've raised £5 million from investors on the back of it and on the back of the potential outcome payments that would arise. And we use that money to pay for a series of services to support those prisoners coming out of prison to reduce their offending behavior so that, hopefully, that will reduce the number of offenses that they are committing and enable, in 4 years' time for the first cohort and 6 years and 8 years for the second and the third cohorts, outcome payments to be made due to those reduced number of convictions. And those outcome payments are then paid back to the fund and generate an investor return. Now, for each of the three building blocks, if you like, of these types of contracts, there are different considerations. So for a service provider, the objective is that this looks like something of a normal service contract. It's got some bits that are different, as I'm sure you'll be hearing through the day. It's a service contract that also seeks to ensure collaboration. Because what we're finding with a lot of the complex social needs and problems that we're looking at, they're not typically solved by a single organization. They're solved by a group of organizations and interventions working effectively together. But it still pays in advance. They're not taking the outcome risk, but they are being asked to help to produce those outcomes. From the commissioner's point of view, and for the commissioners in the audience, this is it a bird, is it a plane? It's a slightly peculiar service contract. It's a service contract, but where you're paying for the outcome and not for a series of specified services. And that makes it quite different to a contract. You're not telling everybody exactly what to do. But it also means that you have a different job of trying to work out what the value of that outcome is to you, and how to ensure, when you measure it, that the changes in the social outcome can actually be attributed to these guys who are doing all this work. Now, the way we've done that in this instance is that for every offender coming out of Peterborough Prison, there are 10 who are found on the Police National Computer to be as similar as possible. And that group of 10,000 to 1,000 is measured, and their number of conviction events is measured at the same time as the number of convictions by our guys. The difference between them, providing it's above 10%, at which point it's statistically significant, is what is measured. And therefore, that difference gives the amount that will be paid as an outcome payment. And it's that sort of thinking. How do we commission on the basis of an outcome, but how do we actually make sure that we understand it was these guys that made the difference, and therefore that we should be paying them? That's part of the work and part of the thinking from the commissioning point of view. And from the investor's point of view, you're looking at it and going, okay, they call it a bond. It's a bit of a funny instrument for a bond. And you would be right. This is more investing in a limited partnership. So you're interested in the cash flows and the returns and similar. The cash flows, as mentioned, outcome payments occur in years 4, 6, and 8. Money that you put in for investment will be drawn down as required. So it feels a little bit more like investing in a private equity fund. And investment returns, if we achieve a 10% reduction in offending behavior across the cohort, that we estimate would achieve a 7.5% IRR, or annualized rate of return from investors. So that gives you, each set of stakeholders has a very different way of looking at this, a very different lens through which to inspect it. And I hope that through today and through the specific sessions for investors, commissioners, and service providers, people are able to go into each of those in a little bit more depth and understand the issues and interests from each stakeholder group. So where did all this thinking come from? What was behind it? In essence, when 3 or 4 years ago, before setting up social finance and working up with commissioners, what we were finding was that, or service providers, what we were finding was that many of the organizations we were talking to, who were on the front line of solving our most complex social issues, had the least financial certainty. They were working in situations where they were repainting their project to try and fit it to another line of funding. So we're running Friday Night Football, anti-obesity this week, community cohesion next week, improving volunteering the week after, anti-terrorism next week. And so it goes on. And so each time you're trying to fit and measure and work with different things in order to get your project funded, your work funded. And certainly for a lot of government streams, as commissioners will freely tell you, because the outcomes aren't necessarily being measured, the objective would be to try to capture and crystallize as carefully as possible the process that you ought to follow to maximize the benefit. And then having established what process you're meant to do, they will then seek the lowest cost provider of that process. And what that tends to mean is it creates a rush downwards. So the process gets followed in careful detail, but the outcomes aren't produced. So this was in part developed to try and resolve some of those issues and say, okay, we understand that commissioning on outcomes produces some problems, but how do we try and make it happen? And can we make it work? And the two big problems that it creates problems with measurement and all sorts of other things and defining success. But if you do define that success and you do get over those measurement problems, then it creates two specific problems. The first is the gap in time between the time that you deliver the services and the time when the outcome is measured. And the second is that it typically requires a range of organizations to be successful for the individual gaining the services to be successful. When that prisoner leaves Peterborough Prison, if they've got a serious drug problem, a lack of educational attainment, little housing, no connection with social networks who aren't taking all the drugs that they've previously been taking, they're going to have quite a lot of difficulty getting out of that situation unless services that successfully address all of those issues. And that means a number of agencies working effectively at the same time. So that if you want to commission as a commissioner on outcomes, you say, hey, we'll pay for these outcomes. Anyone will turn around to you and say, we're too dependent on 14 other organizations to make that work, or 3 other organizations, or 2 other organizations. So the second element was how to create a contract which then allowed services to be commissioned together and to be pulled into working together effectively. And that means also sharing data and information so that we can start to move away from decision-making by anecdote and how well little Johnny did, and towards decision-making on the basis of data and on what works, and on learning more about what works and for whom, and improving the quality of what we do. So what is social impact bond not? I think the other thing that we're finding is that social impact bond is slightly becoming a synonym for payment by results, which it isn't. I think what we're seeing is payment by results for many reasons of interest to government. Social impact bonds is, if you like, a specific area of how do you enable the testing of a new way of working by government or others. So if you're saying, is it better for society to invest in reducing the reoffending of this population, or is it better for society, purely in economic terms, to keep locking them up? Now, at the moment, moving from the model of just keep locking them up to investing in reducing the amount that they're offending is a difficult thing to do, because you've got to spend the money before you save the money. And right now, people will look at you slightly quizzically and go, that's very interesting. Come back another day. So this was designed, again, to try and solve that problem, so that one can test new ways of working, and one can start to invest in preventative work and work that will reduce the causes and the symptoms as well as the disease. Where is this all going? What are we doing next? I think the thing that keeps striking me about this is that we're still in the foothills of it, and we're still learning an enormous amount about what can be done. But we are seeing the starting point for I think, two big themes that could be really useful coming out of this. The first is that it's helping to develop an outcome-based social economy, where organizations stand or fall by their ability to deliver social impact, rather than their ability to tell fantastic stories about people in difficulty, or whatever it happens to be. And I think that's something which is very exciting and can really help many people in the most complex and chaotic and difficult situations in Britain reach and find services that fit them better. The second thing that it's doing is it's starting, and it's really having an impact on the number of people starting to understand the possibility of social investment. That is, spending your money to actively invest in improving society. Not so much passively avoiding guns and cigarettes and maybe alcohol, if that's not your thing, and maybe gambling if you're not quite sure about gambling either. You cross out a bunch of others and sort of hope the rest is all right. This is creating the opportunity instead to say I'm actively pursuing investment that makes a contribution, that improves the society that we live in, and that people can be proud of in the same way that they might be proud of in giving money to charity, or in working with another organization, or volunteering, whatever it happens to be. And we're finding that this particular product has caught the imagination and has started to get a broader range of potential investors and intermediaries, such as private banks and others, interested in social investment anew. So we think that is, if you like, the second broad scope of what we're trying to do here, is grow that pot of available capital so that over time there is a really large pool of capital available to help change and improve society. So with that, I'm very much looking forward to talking to everybody here today, as is the rest of the team from Social Finance. I hope you enjoy it, and welcome.